Greetings from Columbia Business School Executive Education. I'm Scott Gardner. I'm here today with Bob Bontempo for today's webinar, Leadership and Persuasion, Influencing Without Authority. Before I introduce Bob, I'd like to just go over a few quick logistics. As you'll see on the next slide, a recording of this webinar will be sent to you. If you'd like to tweet about this webinar, please do so at #CBSExecEd. And finally, most importantly, please submit those questions to the Q&A box. We'll get to as many of those as possible in the last 10 minutes. It's my pleasure to introduce Bob Bontempo, Professor of Business in Management at Columbia Business School and Faculty Director of our Executive Education programs in Leadership, Negotiation, and Persuasion. Bob's research is focused on international comparative management, including international negotiations and cultural differences in decision-making. He has spent many years advising senior executives on the UN and the State Department on issues of negotiation and persuasion around the world. He is the faculty director of two of our upcoming programs this spring, Persuasion, Influencing Without Authority, and Negotiation Strategies, Creating and Maximizing Value. Bob, as always, it's great to be with you. I know you have a lot of great material today, so I'm going to take off from the stage and I will rejoin you in the last 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Scott, for that kind introduction, and welcome to everybody. I'm so grateful that you've all taken this time to check in. We've got folks from literally all around the world, and I think it's wonderful. I've got 20 minutes, and I'm going to try to give you practical, specific advice. I want to make this 20 minutes useful. That's a difficult challenge, however, because this is a very broad topic, and I usually spend 3 or 5 days working with folks. What I want to do is draw your attention to some slides I've prepared. And let's start by asking you to realize, and Scott, can you please confirm that the slides are working? You can see the cartoon?
I can, yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. So folks, one of the hardest things to learn when we're trying to improve our interpersonal skills is to focus on what we're actually trying to do. I respect that the folks listening are probably really good at their jobs. My guess is you're successful professionals, you work very hard, and you're good at what you do. But I want to try to suggest that one of the reasons it's so hard to improve on our interpersonal skills is because of something that you might find surprising, which is experience will teach us nothing. We don't learn from experience. We learn only when we get feedback. And here's an example. Doctors tend to get better over the course of their careers. Doctors do testing on patients, they form a diagnosis, they treat the patient. Then the patient gives the doctor the gift of feedback. They either live or they die. And from that feedback, the doctor can learn what's working and improve. But when it comes to our interpersonal skills, most of us aren't really getting much feedback anymore. The harsh reality is that in the real world, people don't come up to us at the end of a business meeting and say, hey, your jokes aren't really that funny. Or, hey, I was just about to cave in on that deadline, but you didn't threaten to walk away. Or, hey, we've been hiding some buffer in our budget to roll over into next year as a cushion, but you didn't challenge us on it. So as a result, our technical skills can improve over time, but our interpersonal skills tend to plateau early in life, and then we coast on a set of them going into our adulthood. So that's one thing, is we have to find ways to continue to get feedback. And so again, in the programs we teach, they're very feedback oriented. We do lots of exercises. We have people pair up, persuade, get feedback. We videotape. It's a way to get better. I also recommend getting 360-degree feedback where people rate one another and they let you know how you're perceived. That can be very powerful. Having a mentor or an advisor in your organization is another way. But the point is, we don't learn from experience, we learn from feedback, and it's hard to get it. And that's why many of us aren't nearly as persuasive as we think we are. Now, in the time I have to be helpful to you, I would like to give you some very practical advice. If you want to be more persuasive, the first thing I try to teach people is stop doing the wrong things. And I want to spend some time telling you what that is. Okay? The first step of becoming a better persuader is to learn a degree of self-mastery. Before we can control other people's beliefs and feelings, we need to learn to control our own. And I want to be candid and frank with you because I'm not going to ever see most of you again, so I'll get right to the point. The thing that gets in the way of our ability to influence other people is our own needs, our own ego. The problem is we want to be the smartest person in the room. What gets in the way of our persuading other people is our desire to appear smart, to feel like we won something. And especially challenging is our desire to see that we've persuaded them right now, in this moment. And frankly, that's a little unrealistic. So the first step on this journey to self-mastery is to realize this persuasive conversation I'm having, this meeting, this presentation, isn't about my own ego or satisfying my own needs. It's about me achieving my goal of persuading the target of my influence. And that means you have to ask yourself 3 questions. When this meeting is over, when this conversation is done, what do I want them to think that they don't think now? And secondly, how do I want them to feel that they don't feel now? And then finally, what do I want them to do? Now, let me ask you a very practical question. Do you think people are more persuaded by facts or feelings? There's a lot of research on this psychologically, and it might surprise you. I hope that most of you will accept that we tend to think of ourselves as, well, I'm going to make my decision on this political candidate or this product or this business decision based on the facts. But other people are influenced by their feelings. Well, the psychological evidence seems to suggest that most of us are driven by our feelings first, and we select the facts later to fit into that. If you're not comfortable with that, try a little experiment. Think about somebody that you don't like. Think about somebody that you don't respect. And then ask yourself, would I really be willing to listen to their facts or their information? Now think about somebody that you really like, that might say something you don't quite agree with. Well, because you like them, you're probably more willing to give them a chance, and they might have an opportunity to influence you. This little thought experiment is meant to try to get across to people that our feelings are predominant, and how we feel about other people is very important. And so as a result, there's a great quote I like to share with people from a poet named Maya Angelou, and lots of people have said this, that people are going to forget what you said. People will even forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And so as we go through our talk today, I really want to emphasize that we need to get training in how to manage other people's emotions and feelings. We need to stay focused on being liked, or at the very least, not being disliked. And that sounds manipulative because it's a little bit manipulative. Persuading and influence people is a manipulative act, okay? So the first practical step is, we'll get to that in a minute, but I want to bring up another point, which is another thing that gets in the way. This is still in the category of stop doing the wrong things, is when I watch people try to persuade and I coach them, what I notice is they want to walk up and tell the other person how they were persuaded on something. Let me give you a very specific example. I hope this is not too controversial, but I've changed my opinion on minimum wage laws. I used to think one thing about minimum wage laws, and now I think a different thing. And when I'm in a persuasive moment where I'm trying to change other people's minds about whether the government should institute minimum wage laws, I tend to give what I call the saga of my righteousness. I tend to say, I used to believe X, and now I believe Y, and let me tell you what happened. And folks, let me tell you something. Nobody cares. The first step in actually achieving this self-mastery is to remember, what am I trying to do in this persuasive conversation? And the priority is I'm trying to get the other person to hopefully like me, or at least be open to what I have to say. At the very least, not dislike me. And I'm not here to explain to them how I came to my point of view. Nobody cares. What they care about is how they feel and what their facts are. So stop staying in bed all night before you have a persuasive conversation, rehearsing all of the facts that caused you to change your mind. It's not going to help. Okay, so that's the sort of category of stop doing the wrong things. Put your ego aside. Get control of your own need to be the most important person in the room, or the need to prove to people that you're smarter, or the need to make them feel bad for believing the wrong thing. And focus on what you're trying to do, which is change what they believe. Now, to try to be very practical about this, the next question is to ask yourself specifically, what kind of problem am I trying to persuade on? And in the brief amount of time I have, I'll very quickly say, some things are eureka problems. And eureka problems have a demonstrably correct answer. There's a right answer, there's a wrong answer. And when I share that with people, it's intuitively compelling. 2 + 2 is 4. Crossword puzzles are an example of eureka problems. Sometimes I'm trying to solve the crossword puzzle. I can't quite figure out what a 3-letter word for snake is. And when somebody comes along and says asp, I say, I get it, makes sense, even if I didn't know, because it fits. The truth wins. And what we know from research is that on a eureka problem, simply telling people the right answer causes them to be persuaded by it. But if you're going to be honest and you're looking at this slide, you'll admit most of us aren't getting paid the salaries we're getting paid to solve eureka problems, crossword puzzles, simple things. Now, I spent 5 years behind a one-way mirror in the basement laboratory of the University of Illinois to get my PhD. We would bring people in, we'd study them, we'd measure their attitudes, we'd try to change their behavior. And these are the behaviors that are very effective on eureka problems. Go first, lead with your point of view, explain how you came to believe this, be persistent, try to be charming. That works. But the problem is, most of the time, you're working with folks, you're not doing this. Most of you are getting paid to solve this category of problem, where there is a right answer, but it's not intuitively compelling just because you said so. And as a result, there's a technique called frame it and claim it. For these kinds of problems, for example, which of these 3 candidates should we hire? And I really like candidate A, but some of my peers think we should hire candidate B. Well, that's not a eureka problem. Simply telling them why I like candidate A is not going to change anybody's mind. It's just going to lead to an argument. In those cases, you want to first frame the problem. And framing the problem in that circumstance means, hey, what are we looking for in a candidate? Let's you and I agree, what are the criteria we're going to use to select? Can we state, rate, and weight the criteria? Can we say what we're looking for? Can we rate the candidates on those criteria? And can we agree on how important, relatively, those should be weighted? Once we get people to buy into that framework, I can then say, okay, now let me tell you why my preferred course of action, the person that I think is best suited, should be hired for the role. You get them to buy into the criteria, you frame the problem. Once you've done that, we can then move forward and say, now let me explain why the course of action I want to take is the best one. Now, many of you are at a different stage of your careers, where you're at a senior level and you're going to meetings where there is no objective answer available. You have to lead people on judgment calls where the objective answer is just unavailable. There is no right and wrong answer. For example, how do we allocate strategic resources? Which of these different firms should we acquire? People's political opinions tend to be judgment calls. There's no simple answer to that. And so very briefly, I'm going to share with you a tool that is really the bottom line. What decades of research shows is that people have in their minds what's called a latitude of rejection. These letters at the bottom are meant to represent a series of statements that you could make. And some of those statements, they're just going to reject. They're not ready to hear them. And saying those things creates negative emotional feelings, as well as an inconsistency in what they believe. You've got to stay out of the latitude of rejection in your conversation. As soon as you make statements there, your persuasive opportunity is basically over. The secret of the skilled diplomat is to stay focused on starting in the latitude of agreement. Start by saying, hey, this is a difficult problem to solve. Smart people disagree. It's a complicated one. And then you move along and say a series of statements until you hit this red dot, the edge of their latitude of non-commitment. And that's a region in their brain where they don't have existing emotional connections. It's a statement that's neither consistent nor inconsistent with their beliefs. It's what people might call common ground. What the research shows is statements that fall there create a tension or uncertainty that causes people to open their mind and then seek more information. That's what the science says. If you prefer poetry, I have a metaphor I like, which is smart adults change their minds the way that oysters form pearls. You've got to give them a little indigestible grain of sand and give them time to chew on it and chew on it until the pearl of wisdom emerges. That's the idea. So to summarize, there are different kinds of problems. And that the simplest kind of problem, like puzzles, lead with your point of view, tell them what you think, and they'll say, okay, I get it. But as the complexity of the problem increases to where it's judgment, where there is no right or wrong answer, you literally have to learn to withhold your point of view. Figure out where the target of your persuasion draws their boundaries. Stay out of their latitude of rejection. Because once you're in there, the persuasive opportunity is closed. And then start with information that they're comfortable with and push and push and push in a gentle way until you get to where they're uncomfortable enough that they're willing to think about it. And then you have to stop. And that's the hardest part. People can understand this training, but to actually do it is tough because, of course, you want to have that great feeling where they all say, geez, thank you for opening my mind. And you have to let that go because it rarely happens. Now, I'm going to move forward and talk a little bit more about types of people, because I got a great question about how do I deal with different types of people. And in that example, what I want to suggest is there are, in fact, different kinds of people, and it takes some training to go into these details. But briefly speaking, at the top of this, we have people that are affected by facts, and we have people at the bottom who are driven more by emotion. People differ in that way. And on the right-hand side, we have people who are sort of extroverted and other-focused. And on the left-hand side of this, we have people that are more introverted and thoughts-focused. What I can give you very directly is a whole bunch of behaviors. These are behaviors that are very persuasive for the different kinds of people. And we're going to share all these slides with you later. In the limited amount of time I have, what I'm suggesting is different people are persuaded by different kinds of information. And I got some interesting questions prior to the session about how do I persuade a group full of men, or how do I persuade a senior team? And what I'm asking you to consider is people are human beings, and regardless of their gender or their age or their technical background, if we know what their psychological profile is, whether they're fact-based or feeling-based, whether they're extroverted or introverted, we know that different kinds of behaviors are differentially effective in persuading them. And so these are some examples of very specific behaviors that you can use. If you want a little more insight into this, I'm going to ask you to be honest with yourself. Go look at the last PowerPoint you put together. Go look at the last persuasive email you sent, or the last speech you wrote, or the last persuasive conversation you had with your spouse. And see if you can identify which type of person you are. And I'll bet you $1 that the vast majority of your communication was focused on one set of these. What I'm trying to gently suggest is most of us use the persuasive style that we are comfortable with because it works on us. What I'm asking you to remember when you leave the session is, I'm not here to persuade myself, I'm here to persuade the target of my persuasion. So what I need to do is communicate my persuasive information, that grain of sand that leads to the pearl of wisdom, in a format and a style that works for them, not for me. And that's what this slide is meant to capture. So to summarize, what I've tried to touch upon today is that there are both facts and feelings. We tend to mistakenly believe that we're driven by facts, but other people are driven by feelings. But in fact, feelings tend to predominate. So we need to be liked, or at least likable. We have to turn down the emotional tension. The second point is that we have to think about what kind of problem it is. And if it's a simple puzzle with a clear answer, go first, lead with your point of view, explain how you got there, and they'll say, okay, thanks, I get it. But most of you are facing much more challenging issues. There, you want to frame the problem so you can claim it. Outline what are the criteria, get people to buy into what you're looking for, and then explain, here's why my preferred course of action might be best. But on things like judgment calls, you have to have a script. You have to have a series of statements that you might be ready to say. You have to figure out where the target of your persuasion is going to shut down and then stay out of the latitude rejection. Find the grain of sand that leads to the pearl of wisdom. And then, regardless of their gender, their age, their seniority, etc., people have a psychological profile. That's what the slide is meant to capture. If you can figure that out, you can modify the grain of sand, the style of communication you have to suit them. So those are some, I hope I've kept my promise to give you some practical ideas. What I'm going to do now is take a look at the chat and ask Scott to see if we have some Q&A we could respond to.
Absolutely. We've got some questions here for you. A lot of great questions coming in. A lot of great comments. I will say, I wanted to just start this off by saying that when you asked the question of feelings or facts at the beginning, it was an overwhelming in the chat, feelings. But I think I saw one fact. But it came, one fact, but otherwise it was a majority is feelings. So everyone's on the right mindset and getting a lot of great influence. I just want to kick off my first question because I think it's so interesting. When you talk about the social styles and the 4 styles, and you're dealing with a larger group. So someone asked, when working with a group of people, such as a board of directors, made up of people with these different social styles, psychological profiles, do you recommend incorporating tactics that speak to each profile? Or do you recommend just trying to get one-on-one with them?
Great question. Let me give you a careful answer. I've spent a lot of time in boardrooms. I actually used to be the chairman of a publicly traded company. I've dealt with investment bankers trying to pitch us, and I've done it in the other direction. One skill at that level is to be realistic about power and ask yourself, who's actually going to make this decision? You can do a stakeholder analysis, and you can ask yourself, hey, is the chairman actually going to be driving this and get everybody else on board? Or are there key subcommittees or key people that are most passionate? Figure out who the decision maker is. Do your stakeholder analysis. But you're right, Scott, it's often a group of people, and we need to persuade not just one person. So if that's the case, then I challenge you, put your PowerPoint together, do your speech writing, and then ask yourself, have I hit all 4 bases? For people that are analytical, they want data, evidence, facts, and they want time to make up their mind. So make sure you have that. But for people that are drivers, they don't want all the details. What they want is give me a recommendation. What's the point? So make sure you have that in there. For people that are expressives, they're the storytellers. They need a colorful example. They want to be both moved emotionally as well as, hey, here's how Goldman Sachs did it. Or, here's that big disaster that we avoided. And then the people that are amiables are going to make their decision based on how they feel about you as a person. Do you have credibility? Do I feel comfortable with you? Do I trust you? So the skilled persuader has the data and the evidence for the analytical. They have the recommendation for the driver. They have a story for the expressive, and they have the credibility and relationship for the amiable. You want to hit all 4 bases because that's really key.
It's wonderful advice. Wonderful. So I'm going to follow up with a question that came in from Alex, who says then, okay, you talked about key stakeholder in the meeting. Maybe you identify that as where you may have to focus your message the most if it's a larger group. How do you build confidence when trying to influence senior stakeholders?
Well, confidence is a tricky thing, and I'm going to answer that quite specifically. I've worked with some of the most sophisticated diplomats at the United Nations and some of the most aggressive investment bankers, and there's a very specific thing that I think separates those people from the rest of us, and that is that they are very rigorous in focusing on their worst case scenario. What negotiating trainers call the BATNA, best alternative to a negotiating agreement. What causes some of us to get nervous or lose confidence or feel intimidated is that we focus instead on the best case scenario. We prepare by walking into the meeting thinking, I'm going to say X, Y, and Z, and they're going to respond with A, B, and C, and we're all going to hug and shake hands, and it's going to be great. But then when it doesn't start to go quite so well, we get rattled, we get nervous, we get introspective. By preparing, by focusing on, hey, what's the worst case scenario? What if they laugh at me? What if they decide to go? What if they cut me off before I can even finish? What if they interrupt? Look in the mirror prior to your presentation and say, what are all the things that might go wrong? What's the worst case scenario? What will it look like to go back to my boss without having the deal closed? And by facing that and looking it squarely in the eye, we can often at least come to terms with it. And then it doesn't lurk in the back of our minds and scare us. So I hope that's a very specific and practical tool that can help people. We can overcome our fears by facing.
It's interesting because it's the phrase I hear a lot, and I've heard recently told some of my students is replace judgment with curiosity. So if you're coming in there with a preconceived notion, it's almost like a judgment, and instead of being curious, because you can move from curious, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's what some people call the beginner's mind. Stay in the moment of, what am I trying to do?
Right. So on that sense, when you're in a larger room or when you're with someone that you may not know well, particularly in terms of persuading through the social styles, and through these techniques. Richard asks, how does nonverbal communication also play a role in influencing without authority?
Thank you. Great question. Everybody wants to know the answer to this. And if you think back to that slide about the different latitudes, the latitude of agreement and rejection and so forth, which I'm going to try to put back up here just so we can remind ourselves. The idea is we want to figure out, what is this person ready to hear? And Scott, you can see the slide now, right?
I can, yes, thanks.
Now, I'm going to pick something very controversial right now, Donald Trump. If I want to have a political conversation about something that's very emotional, simply saying something about that topic will cause people to react. There are some people that hate Donald Trump so much, just bring up his name causes them to physically respond. You're in their latitude of rejection already. It's not that hard once you're looking for it, I guess is what I'm saying. My training is focused on having a script, a series of statements I could say about minimum wage laws or climate change or the vaccine process. I think very carefully, not the saga of my righteousness, not what to change my mind, but what is the target of my persuasion willing to listen to? And as I start with things like we agree, like, hey, Scott, it's certainly a controversial subject. Smart people have different points of view on this. And then I start moving along from A to B to C. And as soon as I see you stiffen up, your face turns red and flushes, you get all tense and agitated, I can see that you're no longer listening to me because you want to interrupt. It's not that hard once you're looking for it. You don't need 7 years of psychoanalytic training to read somebody's body language. You can simply ask yourself, are they agreeing with what I'm saying? Are they rejecting what I'm saying? Are they open and processing what I'm saying?
Right.
That's the basic idea. It's not that hard once you're looking for it.
Bob, what would you say is good advice if let's say you make a statement and you've gone to the latitude, you can tell by the body language that you're in the latitude of rejection. How do you sort of backtrack?
Scott, a great question. And I'm sorry, but I have to give you the honest answer. Once you're in the latitude of rejection, it is over. Let me give you a very controversial example, abortion. Some people listening are pro-life, some people listening are pro-choice. And as soon as I bring that subject up, all you're really doing is waiting to see, oh, which side are you on? And once we have a conversation about abortion policy, all you're really listening for is, are you on my side or are you on the other side? And once I say some things that are in your latitude of rejection, the conversation's over. Oh, you're one of those people. And I'm done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The sad truth is, it takes discipline. Someone once described diplomacy as the art of making a point without making an enemy. And if you're really going to change somebody's mind, you have to discipline and restrain yourself to give them information that they're willing to consider that falls in their latitude of non-commitment. And then you have to stop before it becomes an argument. Because once it's an argument, you're done.
You're done. Yeah. So there's a lot, there's a lot of interest in these aspects of the social style. And see here, Juan asked, are there resources to learn how to classify people in styles you just mentioned? I mean, I know there are many out there, but maybe there's some advice you can give on specific places where they can really research this.
Well, Scott, maybe what we should do is send people a reading list. There's a great article called Change the Way You Persuade in the Harvard Business Review that outlines different types of people and how they're susceptible to different kinds of information. We can send them to the TRACOM website where you can learn more about social styles and how to read different types of people. I'm happy to share reading lists.
Yeah, that would be great. I would really appreciate it. Because I think that one of the things I'm seeing from the comments and from the questions that are coming up is that the specificity of this advice, that will work for people, they can use in a daily. So anything that we can provide them, we'll do that for you. I have a good kind of a good question. We're getting past 12. With your permission, Bob, I could talk to you all day about this, and I know we could get questions all day. So can I ask for a few more minutes of your time?
I love the subject. I'll talk all day long. I realize that
we won't keep everyone all day long, but we'll probably go for about another 5 more minutes, everybody. So one other question I would like to ask you is, Rasha is asking, what is the difference between influencing, negotiation, and persuasion?
Well, how much, I need more than 5 minutes, but hopefully you can see the slide I'm showing you now.
Right.
And one of the hard realities for people to face is that persuasion takes time. Be honest with yourself and admit the last time you changed your mind on something important, it didn't happen in a moment. It was a gentle process over time. Persuasion is slow. Negotiation is fast. I've negotiated complex transactions in a couple of hours. But another difference is negotiation is expensive. You have to make concessions. You have to give things up. I have to give you something you value in return for getting something that I value, hopefully more. But persuasion is free. It doesn't cost anything at all. It's just words. You have to do your homework. You don't have to give anything up. So negotiation's fast, persuasion's slow, negotiation's expensive, persuasion's free. In negotiation, you're usually trying to get them to do something. Here, sign this contract, serve on this committee, participate in this process. Persuasion is usually about getting them to believe something different. Very specifically, and again, I wish I had much more time, but when you negotiate, you want to make the opening offer. You want to go first and you want to go big. You want them to reject it, and then you make mutual concessions so you can create mutual value. When you're persuading, you have to start quite differently with things they agree with. Have an open-ended conversation, and then gently move them along that continuum. So negotiation and persuasion are opposite psychological processes. That's why they require opposite behaviors. And what I can ask people to do is, before your next meeting in the elevator on the way up, just simply ask yourself, what am I trying to do here? Am I going to negotiate with this person? Am I going to persuade them?
Right. Would you say that these two are in different realms of your life? In other words, negotiation maybe with different groups of people and persuasion maybe more in leadership roles, or is it?
Another great one, typically, because I teach a course in persuasion, I teach a course in negotiation. I think most of us have the resources to negotiate with our peers, our partners, our colleagues. But we typically have to use persuasion with our superiors, our bosses, board members, and so forth, because we don't have the resources to negotiate with them. We have to get them to think it's their idea. And then finally, the third group, our direct reports, we can motivate. That's a different. So there's persuasion of our superiors, there's negotiation with our peers, and motivation with our direct reports.
Great. So just a couple of final questions, really quick. Elise has asked, now this is just very specifically what you do. What's one tip to learn about just knowing a leader's style quickly? So I know you talked a little bit about body language, but like just if you're walking into a room and you have to just have a tip to just sort of identify it as quickly as you can, which is mostly what we have to do, right? So
I get it, and it's a great one, and I'll give you the dirty secret. Ask them. I know this sounds funny, but ask them, say, hey, before I get started with my presentation, do you want me to start with the history of the project and remind us how we got here and go through all the facts and the details? Some might say, oh, yeah. Or you might just say, hey, should I just get to the point and give you my recommendation? That's what the drivers want to hear. Or, hey, can I tell you a story? Or do I need to establish who we are, what our relationship is, credibility, and trust? The dirtiest trick is you can literally just ask people, how should I proceed? And they will often give it away.
Yeah, if they don't give it themselves, like if you don't have a driver saying, okay, let's get started, then you just have to say, do you want to get started? Exactly.
The drivers do not want to hear any small.
One final question I always ask at the end of these webinars is just, I like to keep the energy going. I know you have your 2 programs coming up, persuasion and negotiation, strategies that are both coming up this spring. But what would you say today? There's a lot of energy in the chat. There's a lot of energy in this Zoom call. What is one thing somebody can start today to do for themselves to be better at these 2 elements?
Well, I'm sharing this slide here, which is really a very practical. Practice on something safe. Don't pick abortion or Donald Trump or climate change. Pick something like, something safe. And prepare a script, a series of statements, A, B, C, D, E statements. Should our city have more bicycle lanes and less car parking? Something safe. And then come up with a series of statements you could say about that topic and then sort them. Not from your own point of view, but from the target of my persuasion, the person whose mind I'm trying to change, and see if you can practice and say, hey, here's some things they're just not ready to hear. Those that would be latitude and rejection. Here's some things they probably already agree with. And these are things that for them might be in the latitude of non-commitment. And then go try to have a conversation with that person and stay out of latitude rejection. End the conversation before it becomes an argument.
Yeah.
The best way to get better at this is practice. You practice by doing your homework, have a script.
Right. And don't start in a high stakes situation the first time. I mean, again, I will repeat, we could go on for hours. There's so many great questions and a lot of great information. I always look forward to working with you. And I'd like to, on behalf of Columbia Business School, Executive Education, myself, Bob Bontempo, we'd like to thank you for joining us today, joining us at the very center of business.